Director of Exhibitions for Art Prize. I'd like to thank Kendall College of Art and Design at Ferris State University for underwriting and hosting the Art Prize Speaker Series. We could not do what we do without their support, so thank you very much to Kendall. Tonight's speaker is Alison Gass. Alison is the Curator of Contemporary Art at the new Eli and Edyth Broad Museum at Michigan State University, opening in November. Previously, she was Assistant Curator of Painting and Sculpture at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, organizing exhibitions of work by Klara Kristalova and Mika Rottenberg, and serving as Assistant Curator on the museum's 2009 Luc Tuymans retrospective. I just noticed that the music is still on. Sorry about that. There we go, that's better. She also worked as curatorial assistant at the Jewish Museum and a research fellow at the Brooklyn Museum's Sackler Center for Feminist Art. Please welcome Alison Gass.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here today. I have to just quickly say that I've seen a lot of amazing things today, but this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. A box of water is fantastic, so I'm going to keep it here and keep having it. So I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about an enormous change in my own personal life and a major change, I think, for the cultural landscape of contemporary art in Michigan. The soon-to-open Eli and Edyth Broad Art Museum at Michigan State University. I'm showing you right there the rendering of the museum, which is designed by Pritzker Prize winner Zaha Hadid, the architect. So I don't know what you know about the Pritzker Prize, but it's like the Nobel Prize of architecture. And Zaha Hadid was the first woman ever to win it. And she's really one of the top 5 most famous architects in the world, I would say, and really certainly the most famous woman architect. And it's a very exciting thing to have any building by her in the United States. And this is only her second building ever in the United States. And it's here in the middle of Michigan in East Lansing. And that was part of what drew me to this job. So I was in San Francisco with my family, working at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, a great long-standing museum. And I was sort of just looking around a little bit to think about what was next for me. And I came across this job listing for the Eli and Edyth Broad Art Museum designed by Zaha Hadid, and I started reading about it, and it was an amazing thing. Eli and Edyth Broad, as you may know, are really some of the most important contemporary art collectors in the world. Eli Broad went to Michigan State University and has an incredibly strong affinity for that school. His chief of staff was just out and told us that all of the Michigan State football games are on his schedule and he has to work around that. And he, I think, felt, from what I understand and what I know, felt very strongly that Michigan State University is one of the most exciting, really most international universities in the country, and one that not necessarily everybody knows about as well as probably people around here do. And to bring a major contemporary art museum there would so dramatically expand the landscape of some really rising constellations of centers for contemporary art in the Midwest, but also bring a national and an international focus. The Broad name, the Zaha Hadid building, these were all some of the things that got me really excited about the possibility of it. And then I came out to East Lansing and met with our founding director, Michael Rush, who's sitting in the audience. And he started telling me about his vision for the museum. So here you see it, I call it in context, because it's, obviously got still its construction site going on, and you see the mid-century student services building behind it. And the museum looks here to be kind of nestled in the trees, but it's actually right at the front, really at the entrance to Grand River Ave, kind of the entrance to the campus, the major thoroughfare that takes you through it. So it's an impossible thing to miss as you're driving down through East Lansing and seeing the brick buildings of the university. And then here is this incredibly contemporary steel-plated museum. So I came here and I started talking with Michael, and he told me about his founding vision for the museum, which is a vision that we're really seeing through entirely as we move forward, thinking about what it means to build a contemporary art museum. And the vision was sort of twofold. Michael had a similar experience to me in that coming to MSU, he was astounded by the international reach of that university, with one of the strongest international study abroad programs of any university in the country, which I didn't know, but also research focuses across the world. really people thinking about issues confronting every topic, every cross-disciplinary idea you can think of. There are people dealing with it at MSU. And then looking around the state of Michigan, of course, it's an extremely diverse state, and it's an extremely international state. There's the way to talk about that place that is about that place, about this place, but really looks expansively at the world. And for the founding vision for the museum is really to make it an international contemporary art center, one that addresses the best work being made around the world by artists from anywhere, from everywhere, and to continue to root that back to the community of Michigan. And I have to say, as I drove in here today, I've only been here about 6 months, as I drove in here today and looked at the throngs of people crowding to get into Graham, crowding all around the street, I realized that we're already part of a contemporary art loving community, one that is really burgeoning here and that I think very much will link strongly to what we're about to open and about to do. So the idea of an international contemporary art museum was kind of amazing to me, but there's a separate part to this which is very unique. The Broad Art Museum has inherited the collection of the Kresge Art Museum, which was the art museum on the campus of Michigan State, which is a very strong, really wonderful art historical collection, one that spans from Greek and Roman time really up to today, and allows us now, as a museum dedicated to contemporary art, to look back through art history, which is something that there's really no other contemporary art museum in the world that does that or has that opportunity in quite the same way. So the plan is really to present a program of exhibitions that look at cross-cultural threads, that look at cross-disciplinary ideas, and to contextualize that from time to time as it's appropriate and as it's important to do within the language of art history. So you'll see pieces from the Kresge collection. You'll see pieces on loan from other museums and galleries and artists' studios from around the world. You'll see pieces from the Broad collection mixed together, giving you this rich story of what's happening around the world, but through the lens of contemporary art. And I was for me, it was something that was just impossible to pass up. And this is what I love, this sort of nighttime shot of the corner of the museum. And it really looks like it's sort of glowing from within. And as I've been there, it really feels like this, it sounds a little bit cheesy, but like a real glowing possibility of a place to house ideas, but also a place to reflect what's happening, not just in the world, but in the world immediately around us. And I think that's something that Michael and I share, and it's something we talk about a lot, to make a museum that is on the campus of a university, therefore can be kind of the cultural arm of a research institute that's already so strong in thinking through issues. So to approach contemporary art from a very investigative standpoint, to use contemporary art to ask what's happening in our world, what's important for us to think about, and what does that tell us about our context. And context and place are kind of the big things that I've been thinking about and talking about, in part very personally because I've just moved from California to Michigan with my family to a very different place, to a university town, to a broader arts community that I'm just getting to know as I explore the Art Prize and other institutions around here. And as I got to MSU, I started thinking about the history of that university. I started thinking about the space of the museum, and I started thinking about place in general. And tonight, what I want to talk to you a little bit about is what it means to build a program from the ground up, which is really what we're doing for a museum. And it's kind of a chance of a lifetime opportunity for a curator. It's an amazing thing. At SFMOMA, which I loved, at the Brooklyn Museum, which I loved, and the Jewish Museum, which I loved, there was a huge curatorial department, an exhibition strategy that was mapped out 5-10 years in advance even. And even as you got along with your colleagues, you were always kind of elbowing them for space to get ideas on the ground and to make exhibitions happen. Here, it's really working with Michael. He and I together have these extraordinary galleries. We have 46,000 square feet of museum, and 70% of that is gallery space. So an enormous amount of gallery space. It's actually a much larger, I should go back to the picture, a much larger museum than it even looks like from the outside. And it's a very varied gallery space. It's a Zaha Hadid building, and she's known for fluidity. She's known for movement. She's known for kind of perspectival shifts. And you'll see that when you come into this museum. You'll see huge galleries and small galleries, galleries with walls of windows, galleries with an occasional slanted wall, which supposedly is a curator's nightmare, but is actually kind of rich with possibility for me. And I'll talk all about that as I go on. But there's a kind of scary thing to freedom in a funny way, because you think, oh, I spent my kind of early professional life thinking I would do this, and I would do this if I could, and I would do this if I could, and all of a sudden I came to a place where I kind of could almost do anything working through this vision for the Broad. And it's hard to figure out what you pull the trigger on, what's the right thing to do, and what will make a community feel excited, what will make people feel like this is their community museum, that they are comfortable in, that they want to come and talk through ideas with us and look. And as we go, you'll see that it's really been, for me, very much about being inspired by the things that already exist in this community and thinking about how those broaden out to the world. So I got to MSU and I learned about the history of the land-grant university and what that means and what the vision was. And it was really a very civic-minded vision that comes with a land-grant university. This idea of teaching people how to be farmers is what an ag school originally is, and teaching people how to feed others. And the ag school at MSU has become something very different, something very international, something that looks at water sourcing around the world and food justice issues around the world and thinking about promoting sustainability while feeding people. So one of the first things that we did, even in advance of having our building open, was kick off what we're calling a residency program, and we're calling it the Land Grant, Art, Agriculture, and Sustainability. And coming from San Francisco, as I'm sure you can imagine, I spent a lot of time hearing about sustainability and environmental awareness and locally sourced food. And I realized that that was something people at MSU and in Michigan are really beginning to talk about. Here, there is a wealth of farmland, and there is everything from industrial farms to urban farms in Detroit to organic farms just beginning to pop up, and there's a big conversation happening about it. And in San Francisco, I had worked with a really wonderful artist named Amy Franceschi Knee, who engages something that she calls and is called social practice. And social practice is something that I think is a very contemporary idea from an artistic perspective. It's artwork or it's ideas, it's almost performance art, but with a civic-minded focus. Performance art with a focus on the world and making the world a better place. But it's not so much about an art object. And to kind of begin to engage our community and think about what we can do in this place that we could almost do better than anyone could do anywhere else, we realized that we could be a place to focus on this kind of new land art. Amy Franceschi Knee does farming as art practice, which sounds kind of crazy, but her ideas are very much about thinking about promoting locally sourced food. And through funding from San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, this is an image of her Victory Garden in San Francisco. She took over the entire front plaza of City Hall in downtown San Francisco and turned it into a giant, beautifully designed urban garden. And the idea was to look back to the Victory Gardens post-war that popped up all over the country, really, when people were having to find a way to figure out how to source food locally and feed themselves. But this was a way to kind of put food and farming and locally sourced ideas in front of everyone as they move through the city every day. So it's kind of infiltrating life through art. So Amy turned this plaza into an urban garden, and she farmed it all year long. And people who were on their way to work could stop and help farm, dig carrots. She put together seeds that she harvested through this process and handed out seed packets, and people all around the city and all around the Bay Area started planting their own little pockets of urban gardens and sending pictures back to SFMOMA, and we began this huge website that documented kind of the viral nature of urban farming, which is a funny thing to think about, but it really was started by this artist. And of course, it doesn't feel like what we think of as traditional art object. It's not something you put on a wall, and it's not something that's on a pedestal. It's something you see all around you every day, but just reframed slightly, shifted slightly to be part of a dialogue about art practice. The other artist that I had worked with before and seemed perfect to me to begin to talk about social practice and performance art and civic art at the Broad is the artist Fritz Hague. Fritz Hague is an LA-based artist who's really well known for a project that he calls the Edible Estates. And what he does is, again, something incredibly simple and kind of incredibly everyday. He started in Salina, Kansas, and he went to some people who lived there in a beautiful suburban neighborhood, the kind we see all the time around us here. And he said, I would like to turn your front lawn into a vegetable garden. And that's all he did. He worked and turned people's front lawns into a vegetable garden. And he tells the story of the town going into an uproar, the neighbors going into an uproar. And that's what's interesting about this project, this idea that there's something about the beautifully manicured grassy front lawn that is so much an important symbol of how we live, a symbol of kind of a kind of social success or suburban success. And the idea, Fritz talks about, he then went around and did this all over the country, and he talks about how every time he goes somewhere and does an Edible Estates urban garden in the front lawn project, Fox News comes and covers it. And what I love about that is that it just, through a very simple gesture, a farming gesture, a gardening gesture, something that anyone could do, but framed by an artist very intentionally focused on pointing us to ideas, we get at some things we may not think about our lives every day. The idea that a beautifully manicured front lawn is a status symbol. Fritz talks about the history of English gardens and the way that the beautiful gardens in Western society really came from wealth. They came from having the ability to not have to feed yourself from your land, but being able to just manicure them. So I invited Fritz and Amy out to come, and we did a huge kickoff event where we talked about farming and food justice and all of these things, and we partnered with some farmers and thinkers at MSU, and we looked at these kind of cross-cultural dialogues that exist through art. Fritz is here now doing a community project for us where he's weaving a giant rug made from donated fabric of people in the community, so the discarded stuff of life, clothes, towels, linens, whatever. We're collecting them all in we don't have our building yet, so we've taken over a former Barnes & Noble space, this empty storefront on Grand River Avenue, and Fritz is here one day a week leading these community weaving sessions. And these are pictures up above from the similar project he's doing in Italy, and down below he put a study rug in a museum space in New York. And he's very interested in domestic patterns. He's interested in the way that making something together, putting a rug in a space and coming together and doing things creates and promotes dialogue. And that really is one of the ideas that we want to get at through art practice. And it's a very simple symbol of the stuff of everyday life that gets transformed slightly through collaboration, through thinking, through talking. There will be also actual artwork in the museum. We open on November 9th, and Fritzs Rug will be finished by that point and will come into our education center, and there will be a series of programs that happen around it. But when we open, I'm just showing you some beauty shots as I talk a little bit. When we open on November 9th, we will have an inaugural series of exhibitions curated by Michael Rush, and those will really very clearly show those dual focuses, the kind of specific thematic ideas. Michael's curated a show entitled Global Groove, which is a video show that looks at the seminal work Global Groove by the great video artist Nam June Paik, made in 1973. And in one large gallery, he will install in a very architectural way, I'm not showing you pictures because it's all ready to be surprised when you come and see it. He will install in a very architectural way 12 video pieces from 12 different countries that play off of the ideas of Nam June Paik's in terms of how video art really changed the way messages and thinking can be delivered, and a very specific, innovative mode of looking and thinking and getting information and getting a visual experience. So in one large gallery, you'll see this kind of giant spectrum of international visual experience, and you'll hear the sounds from the videos from one to the next as you move around, and it will really put together in physical, tangible form, that idea of a collective of ideas from around the world coming at you. There will also be a show called In Search of Time, which is a very cross-historical show. Beautiful, beautiful works from the Kresge collection, from our collection, from the Broad collection, some critical loans, and you'll see paired together works made a few years ago with works made from the 14th century. A triptychs gallery will look at a 14th century triptych next to a Damien Hirst 20-foot tall giant triptych made of butterflies. And you'll look at the way artists think about time with a sense of nostalgia, or almost a slippery but not fixed nature, and think about what happens when you can promote art historical dialogues. Along with that, there will be some major installations that just celebrate the space of the museum. And it was really the space of the museum that led me to what will become my first show, opening in March at the Broad. And the show is called Pattern, Follow the Rules. And I want to talk to you a little bit about it just to give you an idea of how a curator can genuinely be inspired by a building, not just by ideas, but by a space and by the notion of what it means to work with a space. The facade of the Zaha Hadid building is richly patterned. You see that, these steel folds that ripple and change with the effect of light. I like these beauty shots because you see that the museum physically echoes some of our conceptual ideas about responding to the world, responding to the state of the world, reflecting literally what's happening in the world back at viewers and asking them to be part of this and think about this with us. Working off this idea of this very heavily patterned facade, created, of course, through digital engineering and mechanical engineering, and then thinking about what the inside of the building looks like, which I hope you'll see really soon. The inside of the building is expansive and open, whereas the facade of the building appears very solid. You get inside to the space, and the light just fills these galleries in a way, again, like the surface of the building will change over time. And I started to think about the history of pattern in 21st century art, or in 20th century art and in 21st century art. And these are two works from our collection that were part of the Kresge collection. Beautiful Bridget Riley's, the op artist from the second half of the 20th century, who really asks your eye to do duty when you're looking at artwork. The works really almost dizzy you, and they change as you move in front of them, and that's really what op art was about. I started thinking about the history of pattern and how pattern and decoration kind of became dirty words, believe it or not. This is the stuff that art historians really get excited about, but really did become kind of dirty words in some way after the very important movement of abstract expressionism became a real household name when Jackson Pollock appeared on the pages of Life magazine with his splatter paintings behind him, and it was almost as much the man, the kind of tough guy, James Dean of the art world, standing in front of these paintings, and they started to become so familiar that they almost became like wallpaper or like branding, and there was this kind of critical uproar that happened in the language of art criticism in the 1950s when Vogue magazine published these two photographs of models standing in front of Jackson Pollock paintings. And it seems totally not like a big deal at all, but there was page upon page of criticism responding to this, saying this is a travesty. This is reducing art to wallpaper and reducing art to decoration, and that's not what it's supposed to be. And we have another really great piece in the collection by Miriam Shapiro, part of a movement called the Pattern and Decoration movement from the 70s, which was a moment when feminist artists kind of tried to reclaim craft and reclaim pattern or weaving or things like that by making women's work, let's say, and this is a very reductive version of the story, but by making women's work sort of elevated to the language of fine art. And in thinking about op art and the history of Pollock and this Miriam Shapiro that we have, I started to think about this new way that I was seeing pattern. And by the way, once you get an idea in your head, you see it everywhere. So every art fair that I've been to, every biennial I've been to, I keep seeing sort of new modes of pattern. So I thought that there really isn't a better place to look at this new experience of pattern, both from a kind of formal idea, a visual experience, and also from a social experience. And so the show Pattern Follow the Rules will look at artists who construct some set of rules or impart some set of rules, kind of stripping away what we think of as choice making, let's say, when we think about the process of art making, and look to a system, either a mechanical system or a set of rules that they make for themselves. And I'm really interested in why artists do that and what happens when that happens. The works in this show are also kind of strategically selected, and some of them specially commissioned, to celebrate this new space. It's hard to use new space. It's hard, as you know from looking through Art Prize, to put art in spaces where art hasn't been before. And of course, these are galleries that are designed for art, but they're not white cubes. They deviate from the traditional model of the white cube. So while they're not in abandoned buildings, they're in beautiful gallery spaces, we still as curators and as art installers and exhibition planners have to think about how to make a space sing. How do you work with iconic architecture and put art in it and not have those two things fight? And the gallery spaces are rather quiet. They don't have elaborate patterning in them. They do have white walls, but they still ask us to really learn how to use them. And I think anywhere you put art, you have to learn how to use them. And this show was kind of a like teaching gesture for myself, almost even a selfish gesture, to really think about these spaces. So this is the work of the artist Alison Gass, who's based in New York, and it's called Sign. And Alison has been making what she calls string drawings, where she creates a mathematical sign pattern and feeds it into her computer and separates the whole visual image into points, however many points fill this form. And then she makes an entire drawing on the wall out of string. So what you're looking at are little pins put into the wall with string weaving around them. I told you there was a social part to the pattern story, and for me there is. I talked a little bit about this idea of a 70s feminist movement of pattern and decoration, looking at weaving and tapestry and elevating it. And here I love, this is not part of Alison's project, I think, at all, and she would kill me for saying this, but I love the fact that she's working with string, that she's working with something that almost becomes woven, but it's paired completely with a mathematical system and with a study of math that she's doing. So it brings two things that have been, through the history of culture, kind of gendered together. Another artist, this show is not a weaving show, but I'm starting with two artists who work with fabric. This is Pay White's curtain at the Opera House in Norway. What you're looking at is a giant curtain. You see this person down here that gives you a sense of the scale of this huge piece. And it looks like something metallic. It almost looks like the surface of the Broad Art Museum, something very rippling and something that really responds to light. What you're actually looking at is a woven tapestry. What Pay White does for these projects is she crumples up a piece of tinfoil. So again, like not fine art material, not the stuff of high art. She crumples up a piece of tinfoil and photographs it in light and sends that photograph off to world-class weavers in Belgium, which is apparently where you send things to be woven. And what comes back is a huge tapestry made from this image. And I'm going to show you this picture because I think you see it a little bit better. That's Pay on the right. And on the left, you can start to see that when you get up close to this thing, it's matte, it's fabric. You see very clearly that it's fabric. But from a distance, it really looks like you're looking at a completely different material. It's an entirely optical illusion. I like this project for its optical illusion qualities, but I also like what it makes us think about in terms of authorship and art making in an age of digital reproduction, not mechanical reproduction. But what it asks us to think about is that even objects, and beautiful objects at that, can be very conceptual in their undertaking. So this really comes from an idea that she has. The hand of the artist is almost nowhere present in this, but these are very strongly the works of the artist Pay White. This was her vision and her conception, and I think it's something that when we move into 21st century art, gets asked a lot about what happens to the hand of the artist as you move away from painting and move away from drawing. The next artist I wanted to talk to you about in this show is the artist Teresita Fernandez. Again, a kind of optical illusion piece. These are pieces of graphite that she that are all exactly the same size that are pinned onto the wall, so you don't see the way that they adhere to the wall. But as she installs the piece, she has a system of rubbing them the same amount of time and letting the dust from the graphite kind of settle onto the wall. So from a distance, what it looks like is a series of shadows or a series of changing patterns. In reality, as you get up close, you start to piece out what it is. I think of it like that string drawing as a wall drawing, a totally new concept of drawing. It's this funny space between drawing and sculpture. This is the work of Zilvinas Kempinas. I'm just kind of showing you a little sampling of pattern artists that I've become obsessed with over the last little bit of time. Zilvinas, he's a Lithuanian artist, and he unravels videotape, VHS tape, from the reel and installs it sculpturally in galleries. So just that like 1-inch slick stuff that you know that's inside a VHS tape. And this is a piece where he installs them exactly 2 inches apart on the ceiling, across a gallery space, under the lights. So what happens is that this play of light and shadow overtakes your entire visual field. And the videotape is so slick that it kind of disappears with the effect of light at certain times. It slips out of vision. At other times, the shadow reads more strongly than the tape itself. And you have this funny experience as you walk through it of being totally implicated in the piece, because suddenly your body can be covered entirely with shadow at times. And your eye sort of can't fix on what it is that you're seeing. You have to stand back and you have to recalibrate. And again, this is this physical experience that I like as an idea for how we look at art and what contemporary art can do for us. This is the work of Shiraza Hushiari, who makes these aluminum brick sculptures. And I have only one more pattern artist, and the last two I like to talk about because they get a little bit at the social ideas behind some of these projects. So Shiraza Hushiari is Iranian, and she talks about this as a study in veiling, which is a funny thing to think about. But from certain angles, these works appear to be completely solid, and that's a piece in Tokyo on the right, so they live outside as well as inside. From a certain angle, they seem to be completely solid. As you walk around them, you suddenly are able to see in, which you can see a little bit at the back, and it almost looks like there's an interior figure within this framework of polished color. And she's very interested in what you see and what you can't see, and for her, it's very much bound to an experience of femininity in Iranian culture, and she talks and writes at great length about translating something very political and something very social into a visual and beautiful form. The last artist I'm going to talk about in terms of this show is Waleed Besties, and these are photographs. And Waleed Besties' project is very interesting. He's a photographer, he's a conceptual artist. This is a series that is his travel series, and this one is called From Istanbul to JFK, 2012. There's a date, I can't remember it. But what he does, this is a project that kind of started accidentally, so I'm talking about the way things happen that artists sort of can't control, and I'm interested in that. He put his film by accident one day through the x-ray machine at the airport, and when he came back after much travel, he developed his film and it had been completely damaged, and what he was left with was this pattern of color. And he became really fascinated with that as a symbol for kind of a cultural divide, for the absence of vision that can take place when you're traveling from one place to another, the absence of an understanding, kind of a cultural relative understanding that can happen. And so these very beautiful patterns that are created through the process of travel, for him, speak very much to this idea of obliterated clarity or kind of illegibility as you look and move from one place to the next. And they belong in the show about patterns so much because of this sort of accident of their making, but they're very much about an idea. Okay, I'm moving on from that. So I talked to you about the vision to look at art historical context, to look at the meeting between contemporary and contemporary art and the language of art history. And I think a contemporary artist who's doing that really better than anybody right now is the experimental geographer, Trevor Paglen. That's what he calls himself. And he's doing a project right now with Creative Time in New York where he's sent basically he sent a satellite up into outer space, and I won't get into it. It's very complicated, and I don't even fully understand it, but you can read about it, and it's worth reading about. But Trevor has a PhD in geography. He's interested in power structures of our society, but he's also very much an artist. And this is a picture of him out in the desert in California using an astronomer's lens to take pictures, and that's what he does. He has spent a great deal of time studying government satellite reports and looking and tracking satellites and finding them, and he's sort of a very pleasant guy, and he also spends a lot of time going out into the landscape near where there are military bases, and he talks about hanging out at military bars, and he sort of hangs out with guys, women too probably, but mostly guys, and they get a little drunk, and the people start to talk to him about things that they're not necessarily supposed to talk about where they're working, where their camp is. And then Trevor takes his camera and he goes out into the desert and he photographs two things. He photographs the sky, the night sky in his Night Sky series, and he photographs from long range government military training camps that you're not supposed to see. So he accesses through technology things that are not visible to the naked eye. And I'm going to show you this, which is an Albert Bierstadt painting from the late 19th century of Yosemite. And I've asked Trevor to be the first artist to engage in what we're calling a genres project. Artists who have kind of reinvented the traditional genres of landscape painting, still life, portraiture, and history painting, and reinvented those in new ways. We've asked them to come and curate a show from our collection, borrow loans, tell the story of how that genre, what landscape painting has meant, let's say, and talk about a new way to look at that very traditional mode of art making. I'm showing you this because in the 19th century, as Albert Bierstadt and other painters went out west, there was a very specific message to a painting like this language of promise, the focus of the United States as a great place countering the great cultural and political power of Europe, let's say. But here you have this vast mountain range or canyon range with the sky and the sun appearing slowly in the background, almost as this emblem of potential power, emblem of potential promise. And these were almost promotional materials in some way for the promise of the U.S. This is Trevor Paglen's photograph, large-scale photograph. They're about 4 feet by 3 feet, and they get even bigger, of Yosemite. And this is a long-range exposure of Half Dome. So he did his camera, his telescoping camera, out on the mountain, and there's something about Trevor that reminds me of those Western painters from the 19th century who were sort of half artist, half mountain man, and they were talked about that way as these explorers, as not just painters, but really as explorers. And Trevor is in some ways kind of a political and a cultural and a visual explorer in the same way. What he's done is taken this long exposure of Half Dome, and you see what looks to be rain coming down in the sky, and in fact that's stars moving through the sky over the course of the evening. And what's very hard to see in the upper kind of left part is a streak that's going in the opposite direction. Really, I don't have a pointer, but if you look up, there's a streak that kind of comes across at a diagonal like that. And that's the satellite that he's been tracking. And it's the satellite that he's been tracking and looking and researching and looking through code books, and it doesn't have a name. It's sort of unmarked. It's an unmarked satellite. And what Trevor has come to understand through his studies is that the unmarked satellite essentially guarantees that it's some kind of a spy satellite. So it's something that is looking back at us, and we don't know about it, or we don't know what it is. And Trevor is really interested in this idea of surveillance and looking back at surveillance, of kind of making the unseeable seeable and thinking about what that tells us about power structures. This is a long-range image of a military training ground in White Sands Desert, the same kind of an image here, which just becomes almost an abstraction, like a Rothko painting or something that's just very beautiful. But when you start to think about, when he tells you or you read the title of these photographs, what they are, there's something really, really different. This is another Night Sky series. The last thing that I've been thinking about through all these things is the significance of place. And I started by telling you a little bit about the significance of place, the significance of MSU as a site for a major new contemporary art museum, the significance of a Zaha Hadid building that looks so different from what's around it, the significance of being in Michigan, where there is this incredibly growing contemporary arts community, and what can the Broad bring to that? And I think the fact of the very international perspective that Michael kind of foresaw, having learned so much about what's going on at Michigan State University, what we can start to do is really make very tangible this discussion about place, this discussion about how artists can help us think through issues confronting different parts of the world, and what is our place in all of that? Why is that significant for us? This is a piece that I've loved for a long time, and you may know it. It's not a brand new piece. It's by the artist Emily Jassir, who's a Palestinian-American. This was in the Istanbul Biennial in 2006, probably. But I love it as a quintessential piece that explores the flexible meanings of place to different people. So because Emily Jassir has a Palestinian passport and a US passport, she can very freely cross the borders from Palestine to Israel, from Palestine to the United States, which is not the case. There are thousands of Palestinian exiles all around the world. And of course, as a site, it's an incredibly contested zone. For people from all different backgrounds, from all different cultures, it's hard to think about and talk about the border between Palestine and Israel without having a lot of broad-scale political conditions come to mind. Emily Jassir wanted to really step away from that and humanize the idea of what it means to be from Palestine or live in Palestine or be in exile from Palestine. And she did an elaborate project where she traveled around and went to visit with Palestinian exiles all around in Israel, in the United States, and said, if I'm going back to Palestine, what would you like me to do? I will do one gesture, one act for you. What could it be? And people said incredibly simple things. Go kiss my grandmother, which is what you see on the bottom. Play soccer with the first little boy that you see on the street, which is what you see on the top. And she did these acts. So again, her piece is sort of a performance piece, because what we see in the final stages are the texts of the request and the photographs of her doing these things. You only ever really see her from behind. So they're not portraits, they're not documentary photographs, they're a record of this experience and then a record of a project that she undertook. So they kind of hover between action and visual object. But they're also highly political, but highly personal. They're highly political because the topic is so political you can't extricate from that easily. But they're highly personal because the things that she's doing are not political at all. They're very human. They're very everyday. They're things that you can imagine are exactly what you would want to do if you were exiled from a place that was your home and separate from all of the major political issues surrounding that. Of course you would want someone to go say hello to your grandmother or go do the thing that you used to do that was your favorite thing on the street. And for me, this artwork gets to the heart of why it can be valuable to look at issues like this through the language of art practice, to look at things that ask us to think a little bit differently about the stuff we're reading in the newspaper, the stuff we're seeing on television, through the language of an art project. This piece may make you feel very strongly one way or another, depending on your political allegiance, depending on the things that you believe in or don't believe in, but I hope it makes you also step back for a second and just think about kind of the human condition and think a little bit about a bigger picture of it, or a smaller picture, let's say, of individuals who live in these places. And this is the kind of project that I'm really excited about and I think really belongs at a major contemporary international museum in a place where we are allowed and asked and forced to just think and promote discussion and think through art the same way at any university you think through text, you think through lecture, you think through research. We're thinking and asking you to think with us through art. The last project I'm going to tell you about, and then I'm done, is the work of an artist, Imran Qureshi, who's Pakistani, and we are planning to present his first big U.S. project, which is based very much off of the project that I'm going to tell you about now. This is Imran Qureshi's installation at the Sharjah Biennial. He is a Pakistani artist. He's an expert in Pakistani miniature painting. So it's a very traditional mode of making art that you study, and he teaches miniature painting at the university there, where you have a very controlled approach to application. So you dip a brush in ink and you move very slowly and you make patterns. And this is an image of him dipping his brush in ink very slowly and making patterns. You see him working on the wall, you see him working on the floor. This is a close-up of the very detailed set of pattern and image, a very traditional miniature painting flower form that he made all over the surface of this giant courtyard in the middle of Sharjah. And this is the final project. This is the image that you could walk across and walk through when you were in Sharjah. And a little bit like the Emily Jacir piece, in the middle of the Middle East, looking at a courtyard covered in red paint, it's hard to not think about violence, and it's hard to not think about what's going on in the non-specifically artistic vein. It's hard to not think about bloodshed. But when you get up close, it's quite beautiful. It's quite art historical, and it's quite human. It's quite man-made and made with like very, very careful attention, sort of the opposite of violence. And this piece won the prize at the Sharjah Biennial a year and a half ago. And it won, I think, because it is such an extraordinarily powerful site-specific installation. It's a piece that is so dramatic in its context. And through all of these projects that I've lectured at you about for almost an hour now, I hope that you will see a little bit about the broad kinds of programming we'll have there, but a through line, which is really the idea of being what is the best thing a university art museum can be right now. That is to be investigative, to be a place to come and think and learn and enjoy. We see the Broad Art Museum, we've talked a lot about a project we've been doing called the Broad Without Walls, and we see even now that we have walls, and once we move inside of our walls, we see very much that the architecture itself very specifically addresses a relationship to the outside. There's an entrance that faces the campus and an entrance that faces Grand River. This is about the university. This is about the community. The galleries have windows in them that put you sort of right on the edge of Grand River Ave. You're inside the museum, but you're always looking out. Yes, you're looking out at East Lansing, Michigan, but we are asking you to look with us at a much broader field, to look out beyond at the world, to think about the impact of this building, yes, of contemporary art in general, certainly. I think as you move around Grand Rapids right now, you can't help but think about life through art these days, and we hope very much that the Broad Art Museum is another place for you to come to think about life through art. So thank you very much for letting me come and talk to you for such a long time. What's up? Sure, yeah. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them about the museum, about anything I've talked about, anything at all. Yeah. No, the Kresge Museum as it was is closed now, and we house that collection, and we will show it and cycle it through as any museum shows its collection over and over again. So you'll be able to see all of those things, all those beloved objects that people know and love. Michael has, in his inaugural shows, the extraordinary Dali that I think is a landmark thing for people to come and look at, a series of just really wonderful work. So you'll see it over and over again. It's something that Michael and I take very, very seriously as a major asset for what we're doing now. Other questions? Yes? Yes, our public dedication is November 10th. So there will be a dedication, and then it's open to the public. You can register online through, I believe, through our website. Michael will host a talk with Eli Broad and Zaha Hadid, and then there will be programming all day, and the Sunday, the 11th, as well as a big public open house day. So that's the first weekend that we're open. Yeah, online, broadmuseum.msu.edu. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Other questions? Yes. There, oh, Michael Rush, right here, standing right here. Please stand up, Michael. I'm sorry, I should have done that to begin with. Thank you. All right, thanks, you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for coming. Thanks. The final event of the Art Prize Speaker Series is tomorrow night, same time, same place. Elaine Tin Niao. If you want to learn a little bit more about social practice that Alison talked about, come tomorrow night. Thanks.